Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Zevachim, Daf Yud Aleph. We are going to begin on Yud Amud Beis, the fourth line from the bottom. It's not hustle. So we learned in a Mishnah later on, as we'll discuss over there. Shahaya Rabbi Akiva Omer, he said that Kol Damim Shenichnasu LeHeichel Chaper Psulim. And when it comes to any dam that enters into the Heichel, which Rashi says this is supposed to be blood that is hachitzainim, is supposed to go on the outer mizbeach, namely the mizbeach and the chayshes, and it was brought into the Heichel. It's possible, says Rashi. Marber Kiva Kachi Kadashim, the Kadashim Kalim. It's coming to include all different karbanos, whether it's Kadashim Kachi Kachim or Kadashim Kalim. Mariboy the choyel v'choyel, and kaman b'chol zvachim nisharvu. So as we will see it in a later daf, much later daf and pay base. So anyway, if a person would bring in this dam into the heichel, into the kodesh, then it's possible. Amrim chatas bilvad. This din is dafka by a chatas because the pasuk says v'chol chatas says shiva b'dama. When it comes to carbon chatas, that's the din. So that's seemingly what the din should be. However, again, what Rabbi Kiva is being moisif, he's saying it's not just the chatas, even though the pasuk says chatas, it's referring to any carbon which you brought the blood in. Rabbi Lezer Omer Alpha Asham. As this makes sense, l'shitasai, because in our Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer compared the dinim of chatas, if it was shlo shema, it's possible, to an asham. So therefore, he says that at least we should include the asham. Shenemer kechatas ka'asham. So because the pasuk says just like the din of a chatas, so is the din of asham. So Bishlam Rabbi Lezer Kidikar Taima. He actually supports himself with a pasuk. Rabbanan my Taima. Why do the Rabbanan say that it's only by a chatas? So Amarava asham nichnas dam lifnim psul lomatzasamar. To say that when it comes to the din of a carbon asham, that if you brought the blood inside, that it's possible, no, that much you can't say. Why? Because kavachayim oil. Can learn out of kavachayim. Ma, as we continue to Yadal Mumadal. When it comes to the oil, shikol, we know that it's completely burned on the mizbeach. Nichnas damlef nim kshera. Nonetheless, this is whether you're according to the sheet of Rabbi, the Rabbanan or Rabbi Lezer. They don't make this drasha to include an oila. So when it comes to the din of the dam of an oila, if it's brought inside, the din is it's kosher. Ashim shenu kol koshikain. So apparently it should be a double pashut that the dam of the ashim should not passel. You shouldn't be able to learn from an oila, because in oila there's no din kapara. You don't bring an oila for kapara. It's a doidain, it's like a matana, a gift, but it's not considered to be a form of achieving forgiveness, like a chatas and an asham. So where it says, well, minchas chayte teichiach. What's that? When it comes to the carbon oil of yored, the shmias akoil, in the way it says that case and not tamid benitma. Anyway, Tumas Mikdash Kadashav. These are averus, but instead of bringing a chatas shmeina, so a regular chatas, instead it's an oyav yored. Depends on one's financial status. So when it comes to that, it achieves kapara. Nonetheless, if you bring this inside, it's kosher. Says Rashi, the little pasal hakosav el dam, because we'll only pasal dam. So obviously, if let's say you have a flour offering, you bring that inside, so it doesn't passel, even though it's not supposed to be brought in lifnim, doesn't make any difference. It's not going to cause any. It's still kosher. So Gemara says, "Volema." Instead, maybe ask like this: say chatas oitechiach. Why don't we ask about the chatas oif, which again is a din in which again it's for kapara. So it's actually kasher of oven, says Rashi. If you bring the blood in with its neck, im nifsala b'kach oloi, v'lo ifshetila. So when it comes to a bird and bringing its dam, there was a shiloh, we're not so sure. So we didn't ask the kasha, slug it up with a chatas oif. Instead, we gave an example of minchas chayte. So a mincha is a flower offering that certainly, if it's brought lifnim, it doesn't possible because the psul of the pasuk is chatas asher yuva midama. It's blood. So there's no blood when it comes to a minchas chayte. So nonetheless, so again, that should be the problem. That even though it is mechaper, it's kosher. So too maybe when it comes to the same din, when it comes to an oshim, it also should not be mechaper. Even though it is mechaper, it should be kosher. Okay, so v'lifrach. So you can ask like this: Malu milchas chayte shechein enu min zavach. Well, the whole question of saying, it's kosher by a minchas chayte, but that's because there is no blood to begin with. It's a flower offering. That's not a raya either way, because maybe minchas chayte has different dinim, because there's no blood. So you're right, of course, the pasuk says the whole issur is when there's blood, but when it comes to an oil where there's blood, when oil is definitely kosher, the blood that's brought inside. But by an osham, maybe, again, we should say the same thing, it's kosher. So again, oil teichiach. That they're not comparable to another, because an oila there is not has a certain stringency that's kol, and the minchas chayte is different because it is a it's kosher to be brought inside. So fine, but again, it's she'enu min zavach. So he says so lo yizekru zeh tasada shavash behen. What do they have in common? Shein koshi kedoshim, that they're koshi kedoshim. V'nichnas damun. Dalman is the question, because if it's talking about a minchas not lifnim ksher and safani avi, just like an oila, so too I'll bring asham shu kodesh kedoshim nechnas dalman lifnim kosher. So therefore, this is a matzad to tell you, Taka, that it cannot be that this is again el Rabbanan my taima. So this is why this is how Rabbi explains why the Rabbanan say the pasuk says v'chol chatas sheyuva medama cannot be referring to an asham, because you have a tzad hashava to tell you that it should be kosher. So Amalei Rava Barnesh, Rav Ashi v'livrach mal tzad hashava shehen. But what do they both have in common? Shechein ein lohen kitzba timer ba'asham sheish lo kitzva. So what does this mean? We actually had this in yesterday's daf. Can maybe bar the Rashi over there. So it says ein lehen kitzba l'demeyan. There's no set amount of value. V'asham yeshol kitzba l'dama b'kesev shkolim. When it comes to an asham, there's a set amount of money, right? So it's not the same thing. As opposed to these other things, you could the sky's the limit. However, when it comes to an asham, there's a certain amount of money that is allowed. It says specifically kesev shkolim. Ella hainu tamadu rabbanan di'amar. Rather, it's based on the following pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'chol chatos asher yuva midama." As again, the pasuk seemed to be only talking about a chatos, not an asham. You can't eat it. Be'esh tisarif, has to be burned. So what do we see? It says dama shel zev or dama shel acher. It says that the blood, its blood, the blood of a chatos, which means only of a chatos and not of an asham. Okay. V'idoch, right? So how do they learn this pasuk, right? L'chayra, this pasuk seems to exclude asham. Dama v'loy b'sara. It's just telling you that the isser is dafka if its blood comes in. However, if its basar comes in, then we don't apply the same isser. Says Rashi, Shem nichnas b'sarol heichel ein selas. It's only possible when you bring in the blood of the chatas, not the basar of the chatas. Okay, v'idoch, how does he know that if you bring the basar inside, it doesn't possible? So dam dama, because of this extra words. V'idoch dam dama lo darsh. Okay, bishlam rabbanan. So we've now understood the sheet of the rabbanan, that the amri ashim sheshakta shol shmo kosher. we know according to the Rabbanan from our Mishnah on Daf Beis that says that if you take a carbon asham and you shecht it shol shema, so it's kosher, but it's not all l'shem baal, but it's still kosher. It's only by a chatas and by a pesach, but focus on the chatas. So hainu the iskish mincha l'chatas, that we make a hekesh mincha to a chatas, mincha l'asham, and a mincha to an asham, the sanya. What does that mean? So we learned Rav Shimon. We have to focus on who this is. Rav Shimon Omer. The pasuk says, "Lo siafei chametz chelkam." They're not to bake with chametz. The sanya is miishi kodesh kadashim. Here it's holy. Kachatas v'kaasham. So the pasuk says, "Kachatas kaasham," which seems like that in certain respects, unlike what we just said according to the Rabbanan, that an chatas, it has a special din, but the pasuk says kachatas kaasham. So what do we learn out from here? So kadosh kadashim hi kachatas kaasham. Minchas chayte hari kachatas. It's referring to a minchas chayte, a carbon oil of a yared, has the same din as a chatas. So in other words, it doesn't really mean an asham, kachatas ka'asham. We're talking about a mincha, and therefore, and specifically, my minchas oil of yared. So that's what it's referring to. Rafikach. Comes to shalosh shma, because we're talking about mincha, which is the flour offering. The flour offering entails doing kamitza, which we scoop up some of the flour. In the event that was done shalosh shma, it's going to be psula. Why? Because we're saying that the din is that a minchas chayte is just like a chatas. So just like a chatas, the din is the carbon chatas of a regular carbon. When a person does some other avera of b'shayim, which is a mezid b'chayim kares. So in that situation, the din is, as we know in the Mishnah, sholosh shemos pasul. So too when it comes to minchas chayte, if at the time that you do the kamitza, you had a different carbon in mind, a different sacrifice, it's pasul. Minchas nedavar hari ka'asham. However, that's what it means, kachatas ka'asham, that a minchas nedava, a free will flour offering, has the same din as an asham. Afikach comes to sholosh shema k'sheira. Okay, because we're saying, according to this, that an asham, right, according to the sheet of the Rabbanan, holds that it's only by a chatas, but not by an asham. So too, it's only by minchas chayte, but not by minchas nedava. And minchas nedava has the same status as an asham. That if you do kamitza shol shema, it's kosher. El Rabbi Lezer l'may hilchzes kish minchas mincha l'chatas mincha l'asham. So what is the significance of the connection between a mincha of a chatas to that of an asham? So l'chi idach de Rav Shimon. The answer is it's for the other Rav Shimon. So that's why I said you need to first. This first statement was a Rav Shimon, and then we have another Rav Shimon. What is that? Ditnan shloi b'kli sharis psul. What does that mean? It says Rashi, Shul Kaddish a kaimitz b'kli sharis psula. You're supposed to take the kamitza, the flour, and you're supposed to put it into a special kli. Now, what happens if you didn't do that, but you just took it and just immediately put it on the mizbech, the kamitza? That's not good. It says Rashi, Hamanacha is hukshul Zevachim, because the flour offering, especially if we're talking about an oiv yared, it complements and it's comparable to that of a carbon. The carbon, we know there's arba avodos. So we have shchita, which Rashi says kamitza is keneged the shchita, and then you have matin hakaimitz b'kli sharis keneged kabbalas adam. So just like you have to catch the blood, so too you have to put the kamitza into a kli, and obviously halacha keneged halacha, even though that could technically be skipped, and haktar keneged zrika. And being makder the katayr, makder the mincha by burning the mincha is comparable to doing zrika sadam. So those are the four avodos, and it's necessary that you do certainly Kabbalah. Again, halacha maybe you don't need to do, but Kabbalah you need to do. It to be makabel the dam in a kli sharis and bring it over to the mizbech. So too you have to put the kamitza flour into a kli sharis, and if you don't, it's pasul. Rav Shimon Maksher. Rav Shimon says no. That if, let's say, you just did the kamitza right next to the mizbech, and you would have skipped kamitz, you would have skipped the Kabbalah and the halacha, it's still kosher. Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Chia, my time with Rav Shimon. So why does Rav Shimon say it's possible? And this is, again, the other Rav Shimon, what I'll do with this pasuk. The Rav Shimon, what's the reason, Rav Shimon? The Amr Krok, Kadosh Kadoshim, he kachatas ka'asham. Bo oivda biyad oivda. So it's come to tell you that each one has the same din. With regard to the dinim of the halachas of the bring maftir, like the spices, it has to be done the right way. And therefore, what does that mean? Biyamin kachatas. It has to be using the right hand, like a chatas. But kli oivda b'smoil is ka'asham. That when it comes to using a kli in your left hand, it has the same din as an asham. Says Rashi, oivda b'yamin sha'kayim etzba kizrikas dam chatashi biyad etzba u'biyamin. That when it comes to the kamitza as well as the zrikas adam, you have to use your right hand. Fine. And that's what we learn out from here. The whole makom shenemer etzba ukahuna inu el yamin. If you have those words etzba, finger, and koyin, so then kahuna, that means the right hand. However, it says Rashi bol of the bekli, rishoyl of the besmoil. It's only if you have to use your hands, then it has to be the right. However, you want to, if the avoda entails using a kli, then you can use your left. Kizrikas dam, so that's it. Kizrikas dam asham shehi min a kli l'mizbeach. So it's just like the dam of the asham, that it's from a kli brought to the mizbeach. Shein menasinas etzba. You don't use your fingers. Doxib etzba el b'chatas. B'ksher b'smoil, and you can therefore use the left hand. Rav Shimon b'chol hazvachim chutz b'chatas. We'll see later on. Zark b'smoil posel. Hashem masher chutz b'chatas. He only makes an exception dafka when it comes to the chatas. Okay, so anyway, that's what he learns out from here. That if the avoda is biyad, then you have to use your right hand. However, you can use a kli, then you can use your left hand, just like an asham. Rav Shimon, hi kra mapigul hachi. Understand? Okay, fine. So we ask the question. So why don't you hold like this Rav Shimon? No, I hold like another Rav Shimon, right? But using the same pasuk, how could he use both to teach the same thing? So Ikar Kra, look at Rav Yehuda, Rav Chia, Huda Asa. Really, the main element of this pasuk is coming to tell us this din that any avoda which is biyad has to be with the right hand. However, the avoda which is on the left, that is bakli. Minchas chayte, the psula, the whole din of when it comes to a minchas chayte, that is pasul shel shma, as we said above. Why? Because the minchas chayte is like a chatas, and minchas nadava is like an asham. Time achrinahu, the chatas time amai de kasib he, because the pasuk says he. Minchas chayte namiksiv ba he, because of the juxtaposition of the words. So just like on a chatas you need to put your hands on the animal, so too there's the din when it comes to an asham. Okay, so that is the answer over there. Okay, let's maybe see a question or two. Let's go straight to question 5. So as you said, you have the kamitza, you have to put the kamitza into a kli, you bring it, and you do the hakdaira. Pretty easy question. So what carbon is like a chatas that is pasul, that's shlol shma? So we said a minchas chayte is compared to a chatas. Okay, fine. That's all we've done as far as that. We'll see the rest of that question 6 on mid base. Let's see question TA 21. Chatas ha'oif shenichnas dam lefnim. It's blood, but it's the blood of an oif. So and what that was like a question, right? It was a boy the lifshata. Oh, minchas chayte shaknis lefnim imsul. So when it comes to chatas oiv, again, it's a question about oven. A minchas chayte will not passel, right? That's what we set up here. Minchas chayte teichiach, that if you bring the blood inside, it's not going to passel. Of course, when it comes to the minchas chayte, we said it is the same as a chatos with regard to the dinim of shlo shma. However, if you would bring the minchas chayte inside, obviously it's not going to be an issue because the pasuk says dama by the chatos. The question is, does it go beyond just the chatos? But certainly a mincha, we're not talking about its blood, right? There is no blood by mincha, so obviously it's not an issue. Question TB23. Chatas oiv sheknas dam lefnim, or minchas chaytes lefnim himsul. Same exact question, which is of course on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. I wrote chatas oiv zemachlokas, so actually to teku. Minchas chayte will psul kuliyam, will pasul kuliyam, of course. Okay, that's TB23. Wonder if they gave me full credit. It's not really a machlokas. Okay. All right, so let's keep moving. All right, 2 dots. So Yosef ben Chayni Omer Hanishchatin. So Omer Rav Yosef, Omer Rav Yochanan, Yosef ben Chayni Rabbi Lezer Omer Devar Echad. They actually both say the same thing. Let's go into Rashi. Rabbi Lezer Nami Posel B'cherem hanishchatim l'shem Pesach b'zmanoi l'shem chatas kol yemos hashana. So, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he passels things that are shechted for the sake of a Pesach. In other words, if your intention is, let's say it's a different type of carbon, when you're thinking it's a carbon Pesach, it'll passel b'zmanoi. Namely, if it was brought on the 14th after Chatzos, 14th of Nisan, which is the Zman of bringing the carbon Pesach, but it's not a carbon Pesach, you have some other carbon and your mind is a different carbon, so in that situation it'll passel. Well, Shem Chatas Kolimos Hashana. And when it comes to Chatas, it's all the time that it will be an issue. Okay, so again, they say the same thing. Why? Rabbi Omer Bacherim L'Shem Chatas Pligi. So he says that the whole machlokes is Bacherim L'Shem Chatas. Yosef ben Chayni Rabbi Lezer Milsayu Mahai Mastisin Maskana Bo Frushi Diyu Kayu. Okay. So decided. HaPesach She'aver Shenasai. So a carbon Pesach, it has to have a few properties. It's got to be either a Kesef or an A's. It's got to be a Zachar, Tamim, and also has to be a year old, under a year old. Once it's over Shenasa, it's already reached a year old, V'shachtu b'zmanai, and you shefted this carbon, which really is a carbon Pesach, and you shefted it at the right time, but it's too old, Lishmoi, again, for the sake of carbon Pesach, V'chein, for that matter, Hashaykhin Acherem L'Shem Pesach, let's say you shefted some other animal, but it was for the sake of Pesach, Bizmano, on Yodalad, so Rabbi Lezer Pais Rabbi Yeshua Machsher. So Rabbi Yeshua, who says it's kosher, if let's say it was in November, she'enu kosher l'shmoi, that if let's say you shechted it thinking that it's for a carbon Pesach, then it doesn't work. So a cherem, other karbanos ksherim l'shmoi, that if let's say it comes to other than the carbon Pesach, if a person would shecht any other carbon, bizmano shehu kosher, l'shmoi bizmano shehu Bisman is shu kosher. Obviously, if you shech the carbon Pesach at the right time, it's kosher. L'shmoi, for its sake, and it is sheachshar achem l'shmoi. So then certainly it should be kosher. So if you shecht on, let's say Yodalid, it should be good. So Rabbi Lezer ochil devar ma flipping around ma. In November, shenu kosher l'shmoi. If on November you say I want this as a carbon Pesach, obviously it's not kosher. But kosher hu l'shem acherim, but it's kosher for something else, right? If you have some other intention other than the carbon Pesach, it's kosher, as we said in our mission, so not oil l'shem chayva. So bizmanoi, when it's Erev Pesach itself, which is the shehu kosher l'shmai, obviously, edudin sheyukshu l'shem acherim. So you're going to tell me that if you have in mind a carbon Pesach for another carbon on Erev Pesach that's going to be good. It's not good. We know it's not true. It's not kosher. V'yukshir Pesach bi-arba aser shel shmoi. So you're going to kasher a Karban Pesach on the 14th, which is not for the sake of the Karban Pesach, was not the case. Again, on Yud Daled Chatzos, which is the right time for bringing the Karban Pesach, if your intention is for a different Karban, then it's possible. V'kachat ha'omer, of course you can't say that. And also, Mali Hukshu Acherim B'Shari Mos Hashana L'Shmoi. So how do we understand this? That on, let's say again in November, it's kosher, Shekain Hu Kosher L'Shem Acherim, because it works for others, other karbanos. So if Yukshu Acherim B'Zman L'Shmoi, so then you should kosher on Pesach, Shekain Hu Posel L'Shem Acherim, because it's posel for others. So it's not a Kal V'Chaimer. So Amar Rabbi Yeshua Im Kain Harasa Koyach Pesach, you've weakened the strength of the Pesach. It's not the Koyach B'Shlomim, and you've actually given strength to a Shlomim. So what does that mean? Look in the bottom Rashi. Imata Paisel Acherim. If you're going to passel other karbanos l'shmoi b'zmanoi on Erev Pesach, right? Haras Koyach Pesach when it's not to Koyach B'Shlomim. Shekol Shana Shehizman Shlom. We know all year round, if when it comes to a Karban Pesach in November and you have Shalol Shema, so then the din is Shalol Shema is kosher in November because it has the din of a Shlomim. So Pesach Hanishchut Shmoi kosher. If you shecht it properly, then it's going to be kosher. V'hayom Shehuzman Pesach Kol Shlom and Nishchanim L'Shmoi Psulin. If let's say it was shechted l'shmoi for a Pesach, it doesn't work. Nimsis machshava shloi gadol koyach b'shlomim Pesach. We find therefore the machshava is greater regarding a shlomim than for a Pesach, because when it comes to all year round, if you have a Karban Pesach and it's shalol shema and you have the intention of a shlomim, it's good. It's kosher. So we see that the shlomim is stronger than a Pesach. That if on Pesach you have the intention for Pesach, but it's really Shlomim, it's puzzle. So the question is why? Well, obviously that demonstrates what ends up happening is you're weakening the Pesach and strengthening a Shlomim. Chazar Rabbi Lezer v'dainu din acher mitzinu meiser Pesach ba Shlomim ve'ein meiser Shlomim ba Pesach. V'ma Pesach shemutru ba Shlomim. When it comes to a Pesach, when its extras are considered shlomim, shachtim b'zman l'shem shlomim possible. If you shecht on Pesach for a shlomim, it's possible. So shlomim shein moisin ba Pesach. We have, let's say, extra shlomim. It doesn't become a Pesach. So im shachtim l'shem Pesach. If you shechted it on Pesach b'zmanai and udin she psulin, then it certainly be possible as well. As we continue to Yud Aleph Amud Beis. So Amulai. Rabbi Yeshua Matzina, we find that Moiser Chatas ba oila, that if there's extra from a Chatas, it becomes an oil. If ain't Moiser oil ba Chatas, or if there's extra of an oil, it doesn't become a Chatas. Uma Chatas. So when it comes to a Chatas, even though again it's we make more things into an ola than to a Chatas, yet Uma Chatas shemoiser ba oila. So when it comes to a Chatas, in which if there's extra, it becomes an oila. Shachtel l'shem oil. If you have a chatas and you had the intention for it to be an oil is psula, so oil she'ein moiser b'chatas, the leftovers in asham does not become a chatas. So shachtel l'shem chatas. If you have an oil is shech l'shem chatas, and udin shnei psula, then certainly should be possible as well. So Rabbi Lezer lo imar marta b'chatas shechein kosher l'shma kol shana kula. When it comes to a chatas, it's kosher if you shecht it properly all year round. But when it comes to the Pesach, there's only this one day that you can actually shecht it. Since it's possible all the rest of the year, it makes sense it should possible other things all year as well. Shimon Achia Zari Oimer B'chul. So Rabbi Ashi Masti Mishmei Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Achbar Rabbi Masti Mishmei Rabbi Yanai. My time with Rabbi Shimon Achia Zaria. What's his reasoning? Do you remember? Because the pasuk says, "V'yichalas kadshi b'nei Yisrael es asher yorimu Hashem," that a person should not profane the kadshi b'nei Yisrael es asher yorimu Hashem, and should elevate it. So b'moyrim mehen ein mischaloan. b'nomoch mehen mischalon. So let's go all the way back to our first Mishnah, and it said that what's the din when, for example, kachi kadashim and kachim kalim. So let's say you shechted an animal which was kadashim kalim, but you have in mind that it's for an oila, for example. So then it's kosher, right? Again, kachi. If let's say again, you have kachim kalim sheshachlu mashim kachi kadashim, it's kosher. However, let's say the opposite, that it's kachi kadashim, and you shecht it l'shem kachim kalim, then it'll be pasul. So that was his distinction, and it's based again on the diak of this pasuk. It says you cannot profane esash yarimu, but moire mehen. Anything that goes higher to it does not become profane. In mischalin, but namach mehen mischalin. So therefore, again, if let's say you have something which is a higher level, and you have in mind for it to be a lower level carbon, then you're mischalin. You profaned it. However, if it's lower and then you elevate it, so then you're not mischal, and therefore it's not going to be apostle. Is that really what this is coming to teach us? How do we know that the din is if a person would eat untithed foods that he's chai misa? Shnemar v'choloi chalu es kachim in Israel es ashirim l'Hashem basidim litur makas madaber. It's referring to tevel. So im kenedim krashir hormu mayashi yarimu shma min atarti. So this pasuk actually teaches us two things according to him. One, pashit that that a person who eats tevel is chai misa, and second of all, this din that the whole issue is only when you downgrade it in your mind shalosh shema, but if you elevate it shalosh shema from kachim kal to kachim, then it will be kosher. Boy Rav Zera. Now, what does it mean when he says from going up it's kosher? Ksherin ve'in maratzin. Does it just mean that it's kosher, but it's not oil l'shem chayva? V'chi polig b'chada polig, and therefore he only argues with the Rabbanan regarding this one thing, not if it's so. It's definitely not maratza. They all hold it's not maratza. The Rabbanan again hold that it's only by chatas or by a pesach b'zmanoi, but nothing else. So not the Rabbanan would disagree if it's kadshei. Kadashim kalim to elevate the kachim, that it's still not, it's possible. But even though he says it's kosher, maybe he agrees with the Rabbanan, certainly it's not maratza. Odilma ksherin maratzin and v'tarti pliki. Maybe Taka, he says that not only is it kosher, but it's even maratza completely. So Omer Rabbi v'yitem Rav Zreika Tashma. It says habachor b'maiser sheshachnu l'shem shlomim. Now even though a bachor, Meiser Behema and Shlomim are all Kadashim Kalim. They are the lower level of sanctity. Nonetheless, even within that category, Shlom is higher because we have other things, Chaz HaShaik, Smicha, Tenufa, etc., as opposed to Meiser and Bechor do not. So anyway, because of that, it says, if you shechtel Shem Shlomim, for a higher level, Ksherim. However, Shlomim sheshachnu l'shem b'chor l'shem ma'aser p'sun. You want to tell me that the Shlomim is maratza even? So b'chor bar ritzayu. So I understand what was this whole question. Does the b'chor provide some type of appeasement or achieving something like that? El ksherim in maratzin. That's obviously in maratzin. I'm going to say for ksherim in maratzin, because it says it's kosher, but it's not maratzin, right? Reisha nami ksherin ve'in maratzin. So my area, hakadisa, one has nothing to do with the other. They're separate cases. El my kamashmon, gavov another kamashmon. Just to tell you higher and lower, that shlomim is higher. Tanina, so we learn like this. Ketzad kashi kadashim shachim l'shem kadashim kalam b'chulu. Mahu detema kashi kadashim kalam hu deika gavov anamuch. You would think because these are two distinct categories, that's where there's a difference. Avol kalim b'kalim, loy, maybe not. So maybe that even though it's true, Shlomim is higher level than Bechor or Meiser, but they're both Kadashim Kalim, so maybe we don't make the distinction between the two. So the Chiddush is that we do make a distinction going up and down, even within Kadashim Kalim. So Hanami Tanina, we also learn that Shlomim koidmin as b'chor. Mimnei shehem tunin matan arba smichin nesachim to do what's called a shaik. We already know that the shlomim has precedence. So ha'ikar hahi agrinatzav. So over here, over there was the ikar, and over there it was just being like dragged along. Okay, we're gonna stop there. Do we have another question? No, Adkan.